Meet NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson, next on a special edition of Carpe Diem. Welcome to Carpe Diem. I'm Mark Rosenweig, retired associate professor in the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Our guest is NBC News Chief White House Correspondent and MSNBC host Hallie Jackson. She joined NBC News in 2014 to serving as national correspondent for Hearst television stations in Washington. During the 2016 presidential campaign, she landed exclusive interviews with candidates Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, and Marco Rubio. That's a lot. She also started her television career reporting at stations in Hartford, Connecticut, and Salisbury, Maryland. She's on campus today to receive the Allen B. Dumont Broadcaster of the Year Award and to meet with students. And welcome. It's great to have you here, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. It's fascinating to look around and see everybody here at Montclair. I feel so welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you grew up in Yardley, Pennsylvania.
Not too far, yeah, just across the river from Trenton, New Jersey.
Right, and almost in our midst. And you went to Johns Hopkins where you majored in political science.
Right.
And how did you get into journalism? How did it all happen?
So it's interesting, and it's funny being here. I was telling some of the students before we started taping that it is amazing to look around and see the resources that Montclair has and the hands-on experience that the students here are able to get. I didn't have that when I was at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, mostly because I went there not knowing what I wanted to end up doing. I knew that I loved the school, I loved the university when I was coming out of college, but I was one of those kids who went in without any idea what I wanted my major to be. And I realized about halfway through my time at Hopkins, I went to this program that we held in New York where they kind of show you around different media groups, communication stuff. I gravitated towards that. I knew I might like that because I tend to like writing, and that's at the foundation of everything that we do as journalists, and asking questions, which also happens to be at the foundation of everything we do. And I got bitten by the journalism bug. And I'll tell this story later, I think, but one of the things that happened was I went to my advisors at Hopkins, which was an amazing school. I'm still very close with the folks there in the Alumni Association, and I was very involved in school. But an advisor said, listen, I think if you want to pursue journalism seriously, I think you should transfer. You should go to a school that has an actual communications program. Go learn. Go to one of these other places, and we'll help you succeed there. And I thought, man, that's a big life decision. I was 20 years old. I'd already spent several years at this university that I loved. I was involved in extracurricular activities, the student government, Greek life. We ended up going to this conference about a month later after I got that advice. And I was grappling with it. I was talking to my parents. I said, do I really want to transfer? I love Baltimore. I love this place. Cokie Roberts happened to be the keynote speaker.
What a great role model.
So I never met her in my life. She delivered this beautiful speech to my sorority group that was there for this national conference. And she left, she walked out, and I thought, man, this is my opportunity. And so I'm ashamed to say I followed her into the bathroom like a crazy person.
As a good reporter
maybe, perhaps. I stayed in the lobby at least. I didn't actually go in the stall. And she came back out and I said, Ms. Roberts, I'm so sorry to do this to you. You don't know me. And I gave her my 30-second elevator pitch. I said, I really think I want to do journalism. I go to Johns Hopkins. They're telling me to transfer. What do you think I should do? And she looked at me and she said, you don't need to go anywhere. Just learn how to ask questions, be smart, and be hungry. That's all you need. You will learn all the rest of it on the job wherever you are. And for me, it was enough to sort of set me on this path to think, yeah, you know what? That's all you really need. You just have to be a well-rounded person and be curious about the world. Just be curious. That's it. That's what it comes down to. And I went back and I said, hey, I'm not going to transfer, but let me figure out how to do some internships in Baltimore, in local news, and some of these places. And maybe that'll help me figure out how I can actually land a job in this field, having no experience in a studio or
and
resume
the internships are critical for our students too.
They're huge.
And so is campus media. That's helpful as well.
Sure, and when you're at a place that doesn't have campus media, at least broadcast media, you think, how do I crack into this? So I did that. I interned every semester from there on out at WBAL TV in Baltimore, which I later ended up working for when I worked for Hearst, which was kind of a great full circle moment. And now I get to report for them because they're an NBC affiliate, so it works out well. And that's kind of how I got into it.
And then you found your way to a small station Salisbury, Maryland, Delaware,
Went
etc.
on-
What kind
yeah.
of experience was that? I mean,
It was
to get that
amazing.
small market experience starting out.
So I ended up out of college, you have to have a resume tape if you want to end up doing the broadcast thing. And I hired a guy off Craigslist to help me put this resume tape together. I mean, it could not have been a crazier thing
I'd like to see that someday.
You'll never see it. I can guarantee you
It's
that.
not out there. Everything's out there.
We recently redid our basement, and my partner and I found the tape, and he took it, and I said, you better burn that.
Yeah, you better make sure.
So I ended up sending it out to a bunch of small market stations all around the country, and I was really prepared as a young reporter, wannabe reporter, to move. You can't stay. You got to be willing to get out there. I applied to stations in Montana. My first interview ever was at the northernmost tip of the continental United States in Presque Isle, Maine. I think it was market 202 at the time. There's only, 206 markets, right?
Great lobster, though.
Great lobster,
Yeah.
40 feet of snow in the winter, And I ended up, it was a sports position because I didn't know, I was sort of applying to everything. And then this position in Salisbury, Maryland, not too far from where I went to school in Baltimore, just 3 hours, that came open. And I went in, interviewed, they hired me, and it was like grad school. I mean, the joke was that I should have been paying them rather than them paying me.
Well, because when you start out like that, you're
Yes.
probably making mistakes on the job.
Constantly,
and
all the
learning
time.
from those mistakes.
And you're finding people who can be mentors and resources to you. I mean, I was reporting, it's they call it Delmarva, right? Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and it's an agricultural county. I had Sussex County, 900 square miles of farmland and a tiny sliver of fun beaches, right? So I lived in this party town called Rehoboth Beach. I had friends up every weekend, but
Well, that's not bad.
Saturdays and Sundays were fun.
Yeah.
Mondays through Fridays, you're just out there cranking. But everything from chicken farms to county council meetings, and it was an experience that I wouldn't trade for the world. And when some of the younger folks coming up at NBC talked to me about, like, hey, how do I get the next step? Get out in the world. Go work for local news. Go do something else outside the New York or DC bubble, because that's how you're really going to learn what people care about and how to get your boots on the ground. When you're looking through board minutes of a county council meeting to see which one you should go to figure out what story you're going to pitch the next day.
And then you go to Hartford, learn a lot, I'm sure, there at a bigger market
Yeah.
and so on, and then DC for Hearst.
DC for Hearst.
Yeah, what kind of adjustment was that to DC?
It was a big one, and I was ready to take the next step in my career, and I didn't know, do I want to do New York, do I want to do DC, and I had always been drawn to Washington. I was a political science major for a reason, right? It's something that interests me. I liked that area of work, and I ended up working for Hearst, which is a local station group. So they owned a whole bunch of stations, and I was their Washington morning reporter. So I would work 2 a.m. till about 11 a.m. noon, just filing stories for, 30, I think, local stations all around the country. And it was a different experience in that I went from boots on the ground, doing your own stories, to sitting in a bureau, which was the job, doing live shots.
Right.
And it was a stretching a different muscle. So you talk about 10,000 hours, it takes you a while to get kind of good at something. Boy, the repetitive live shots, right? You better learn how to talk to a camera when you're doing 50 of them a day, live television and tape television. And it was a great experience in that it got me in DC, which I love. It got me sort of working on some big stories. I started there in 2012, and my first assignment was to go to the convention, the Republican National Convention. And talk about being dropped into the middle of like the biggest story in the world. I started in July. And it was incredible to have those experiences. We would do live shots at the White House. We would go there for interviews. I interviewed Dr. Jill Biden when I was at Hearst. So you had some sort of great experiences that helped shape me. And then in 2014, I ended up applying for a job at NBC and got it.
And then you're in the LA bureau chasing what, wildfires?
Wildfires
earthquakes
and red carpets and everything other than you could think of other than politics. We did a story on your childhood diaries and this movement that people do to go read their diaries out loud to people. I mean, it was just such a breadth of experience, and it was wonderful because it was my first introduction to what it's like to be a network news correspondent. And that is, LA is where all the new correspondents for NBC go to learn. It's boot camp. And you go and you get sort of inundated with every type of story, every type of platform, MSNBC, Today Show, nightly news, you're doing it all, digital, the streaming platform, and it's really a way to kind of learn, okay, how do I juggle all this stuff?
So were you happy to get the call back to DC after all of that?
I fell in love with California very hard, and I thought I was going to be there for a while because I was the cub reporter. I was the new girl on the block, coming in for NBC. My colleagues are so talented, and Miguel Almaguer is chasing the wildfires. They didn't need me to do that, right? But I was doing these sort of feature stories that were really cool. But in 2015, I don't know if you remember, but 17 Republicans started running for president. And they called me up and they said, Hallie, we got a lot of people running. We know you have political background and a sort of experience in political journalism.
See, that's it. You had the versatility and the background
because
in all these
yeah, I had
areas
studied it
which
and I
you
had
built
covered
up.
it. Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And they said, can you go on the road? My boss at the time, can you perch in Washington for a couple of weeks? I said, okay. So I went and perched in Washington and never went back home. Moved all the stuff out, moved it into storage, and 2 years later moved to DC full time.
Well, then, you know, we come up to the 2016 race
Right.
for president, and you were on the campaign trail. How grueling was that to be a road warrior? Give us a little inside view of that.
It's a tough, it's a life that is so fulfilling, but so different from anything I'd ever experienced because you are on the road for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. So I would go home, change up my suitcase, do some laundry for a night and come back. And that was my life for just about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And it was the journey of a lifetime. I mean, talk about being on the front row to history, you truly are. And I covered basically every candidate before Donald Trump, then candidate Trump, ended up taking the nomination. And so it gave me a real range, I think, of people to talk to and sources and seeing different campaigns and kind of having those experiences. And the lifestyle piece of it, sure, was challenging. You're traveling a ton, but it's also so much fun. And when else in life are you going to do that? And what an opportunity to do that on this incredibly important election year and election cycle. And so by the time summer of 2016 came around, I was covering Donald Trump full time with the rest of our team at NBC News. And NBC said, hey, I think you should keep doing this after the election. And we're gonna put you in as our chief White House correspondent. So I started doing that in November of 2016,
That was a great
inauguration
journey.
day.
When you think back to that time, though, did you think Trump was going to win?
It's an interesting question because I was on the road talking to people at Donald Trump rallies and out in the country who were not opposed to him. And I think that, one of the things people ask is what surprised you most about your time in 2016? And it is that this Acela corridor bubble that people talk about is real and it really exists. And when you, I think, live in that, it's tough to understand how folks in the rest of the country feel. And that's not to say it's a homogenous thought area, right? There's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions. But when you're traveling so much, you're just having coffee. Not because you want to go talk to people at a coffee shop, but because you need some caffeine, right? And you naturally strike up conversations, or you go to have breakfast and somebody asks, what are you doing in town? And you just naturally start to talk to people. And I think there was an openness to electing a Donald Trump in some of these key states, like Pennsylvania, that was obviously unidentified by, I think, some of the polling and the punditry that was out there.
You mentioned getting out there, away from D.C. Should more D.C. reporters get out there occasionally?
Yes,
What do
and
you
many
think?
of them do. I think there's some great reporting being done. For example, Jenna Johnson over at the Washington Post has a great beat where she goes out and sort of takes the pulse of voters across the country. I think it is so important to do, and it's one of the challenges, I think, covering the White House. I'm very tied to that building now because I have to be. The president is there, and he is making news on a daily and hourly basis, it seems, and you're reporting and working your sources and trying to bring news to the people. But I think it's one of the great things about NBC News, obviously where I work, is that they have invested so many resources into the next class of road warriors who are out there pounding the pavement and doing all those things. Ali Vitale, Shaquille Brewster, Vaughn Hilliard, the list goes on, in addition to our embed class. And that, I think, is what helps NBC, in my opinion, stand out from the pack, that we have those resources out in the field and people who are taking the temperature of the voters.
But how challenging is it for you right now covering this administration? For example, access, no press briefings. If you get access to the president, it's to shout a question out on the lawn. What are the challenges? How do you cope with that?
So the access challenge is an interesting one because when you look by the numbers, we have not had a formal press briefing, and it's going to be almost a year in March, which is, if you had said that to anybody 5 years ago, they would have said, you're kidding, that can't be possible. Now, that said, this is also a president who is far more accessible in these informal Q&A settings than some of his predecessors have been. So for example, I was recently the pool reporter. That happens every few days. You go in and you represent. You obviously can't have 500 members of the White House press corps going into the Oval Office, so it's a rotating basis of who goes in. You are feet away from the president asking him questions as he's sitting next to a world leader, and he is answering them. You're on the South Lawn, and that poses challenges because the helicopter is going as he's getting ready to take off to a rally,
20 other people.
1,000 people yelling,
yeah.
but he will oftentimes engage with reporters there. So you are getting direct information from the president. Why? He is his own communications director. He's his own press secretary. He's his own chief of staff. That is almost trite to say at this point, but it's true. He doesn't want somebody else dictating the message for him. And it's taken some time, but his staff has finally learned that there's no need to go out and put yourself on the line and your credibility on the line when you know the president could potentially undercut you, and the president can just speak for himself. Now,
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it does present some challenges in that one instance I was on the South Lawn and the president was upset with me for some reason that day. And so I asked him a question and he said, I asked him the number of troops he was going to pull out of Syria, whatever the question was. And he goes, well, I have an answer. I'm not telling you, and moves right on to the next person. In a formal news conference, that doesn't fly. He can't just move on so quickly. But in those settings, he can, and that's part of the challenge as well.
I wanted to ask you, we had 4 women moderating a debate.
We sure did.
As we're taping this, it's right after the debate. What does that say about women in journalism? What more needs to be done?
Listen, I think that and I got to shout them out, Rachel Maddow, Andrea Mitchell,
Many
Kristen Welker, Ashley Parker, friends and colleagues, and it was such an amazing thing to see them on stage in what frankly was the most substantive debate of the season, I think, so far. And I think there's a reason for that. The preparation that went into it, the intelligence that went into it. I know behind the scenes what they had to do, at least a little bit, to get ready for this. And the caliber and quality of journalists on that stage is, to me, unparalleled. So I'm so proud that NBC, and to call them friends and colleagues, that NBC put them on that stage. Is there a long way to go for women in journalism? Sure. But could you have imagined 4 women moderators 20 years ago? I don't know. And I think that the fact that they were on that stage at all is significant and notable.
I looked it up, and I think it was like the 3rd time, but it was the first time you
biggest
had 4.
Panel, 4 of them, right?
Yeah,
sure.
Usually it was 1 or 2.
Exactly. And some of the
Pauline
GOP
Frederick
debates, exactly.
and
Martha Raddatz has solo moderated and all that.
Yeah.
But I think, listen, there are days when I look around the front row in a press conference, and at times, sometimes you're the only woman, at times you're one of 6 women who are in the front row. And I love that there are so many women colleagues that I have in the White House press apparatus, from CBS, from CNN, from AP, from Reuters, who are there holding people in power to account, just like anybody else would.
So you're optimistic about the future for women in
Gosh.
journalism? Yeah.
Geez, I think anybody who looks around the landscape of journalism can see that some of the best work is being done by women journalists.
I read that your dad gave you advice on how to deal with the highs and lows of life, career, personal, whatever. Share his wise advice.
I love that you asked me about that because I'm very close with my family, with my dad and mom, and this is some of the best advice. I say it all the time. My partner says, gosh, he quotes it back to me, don't get too high on the highs, don't get too low on the lows. That's it.
It's a challenge, though, for all of us, isn't it, at various times?
It can be a challenge, especially when, sometimes things get hard, right? When you're sort of trying to juggle the work-life balance, for example, whatever balance there is, or when you've had a really great day. But it's, hey, there's always going to be something else tomorrow. That's one of the reasons I love this job. It is so fast-paced that if you always know there's another broadcast, there's another story. You've got to continue to be doing your best on a regular basis. Can't rest on your laurels, but if something happens and you mess something up, you always have tomorrow, and I sort of love that.
What are the challenges of using social media for you? Because I know you use Twitter and I think Snapchat or something like that.
So I've sort of gotten off Snapchat. I think the kids are still on it.
What are the pluses and minuses? What should our students really know about that?
I think for this generation of journalists coming up, social media is so important, but it's also just media now, right? Social media is just media. I find it challenging from sort of a big picture basis. I'm fully off Facebook these days. It's just not a platform that speaks to me. I do far less Twitter than I ever used to. Much less Twitter. And the only one I'm really on anymore is Instagram because I like it and enjoy it personally. I think it's fun. I do a lot of Insta stories. I've found that that's been really enjoyable for people who are sort of in my community of people on Instagram. But I do think, listen, we are at a time when what you put out there on social media is media, and you have to know that what you tweet or write or say or put on Snapchat when you're 18, 19, 20 will be with you for the rest of your life, whether you like it or not. I think that's a lot of responsibility. I didn't have that when I was in college. Facebook had just come out, and that was sort of the only one. But I do think it's a weight and a responsibility on students these days.
Absolutely. Now, you had an exciting announcement recently.
I did.
That you're expecting your first child.
First baby.
I imagine from social media and all over the place, tremendous response,
It's
right?
been really wonderful. We feel, Frank and I are just over the moon. We're thrilled, a little terrified, I think, as is natural with your first kid. But the response has been overwhelming, and we just feel so wrapped in love and support. And it's just been it's been a beautiful week. I'm catching you just a few days after we sort of made the announcement.
The timing
so
is
thank
great.
you.
It's exciting to have you here. And
Thank you.
we look forward to introducing you to our students in a few minutes, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Mark.
And thank you for joining us. If you'd like more information on this or any edition of Carpe Diem, write us at carpediem@montclair.edu. I'm Mark Rosenweig. For all of us at Montclair State, thanks for watching Carpe Diem.